All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, just a couple of those normal reminders. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. You can type those in by clicking that Q&A section or the chat section in the lower portion of your control panel. We'll be posting a recording of the webinar on our blog. The link for that will be shown at the end. And if you'd like a PDF copy of the presentation, there's going to be a link to download that on that same post as the recording. If your question does not get answered today, or if you think of any others, please email our support inbox, which will be shown at the end as well. All right, what's on the agenda for today? If you've done the Health Check 360 program with us, a lot of you know that you get an overall score based on different areas of your biometrics. So today we're going to talk about how habits you do day in and day out affect these biometrics, which then affect that overall score, right? And then how you can take small steps in areas of your health to either keep that score in a good range or hopefully move it in the right direction. So before we jump into the specific areas, I just want to briefly remind everyone of what we test for on that screening typically. Now, there are variations to what is tested and what the scoring is depending on the company. So I'm just going to use what we consider our standard biometrics for our purposes today. Go ahead and pull up your report or your guide to see what they test for specifically, see what your scoring is specifically. So first on the standard model, we have body measurements, BMI or body mass index. We also measure waist circumference. We have blood pressure, we have glucose or that blood sugar, and then we test cholesterol. So 3 parts to the cholesterol. We have the HDL, the good stuff, the LDL, which is the bad stuff, and then we have triglycerides, which we also want to keep low. Then we also have the cholesterol ratio, which is your total cholesterol divided by your HDL. Basically thinking that the bigger the percentage of HDL we have of that total cholesterol, the better off we typically are. And then we do test nicotine on our standard model. We're not going to cover nicotine specifically today, but if you would like to chat further about quitting, please talk to your doctor, give us a call, and we can absolutely support you with that. Now, there may also be a variety of additional tests on your report as well. Things like liver and kidney function tests are added to a lot of the reports, but those are not scored in that overall 0 out of 100 scoring. So we're just going to focus on the biometrics for above for today and where you can make some changes to help increase that score. Okay, let's get into it. How do our habits affect these numbers? Some of these things are going to be pretty obvious, but hopefully you'll find a couple other little nuggets of good information today. So we're going to start with those measurements. So nutrition. If you eat too much in general, typically your weight is going to go up, right? Along with your waistline. But it's also more than that. If you eat foods that contain good nutrients, your body's going to use these up for various functions, and then the foods get metabolized and they essentially go away, right? If you eat something that is full of excess sugars, for example, your body can't use up all of that energy, and it's going to store that extra energy, those extra sugars, as fat, making that scale go up. And sugars and those types of foods typically like to get stored in that midsection area, which makes that waistline go up as well. So quantity with our nutrition and quality are going to affect those measurements and the BMI. How about exercise? Exercise helps burn up extra calories, right, which prevents them from being stored and causing the waist and weight increases. Exercise also helps boost metabolism, even when you're not exercising, which means that you burn more calories even at rest. This is especially true of things like weight training or higher intensity exercise. For the weight training specifically, typically if you have a larger percentage of lean mass overall, that larger muscle, the more calories you're going to burn throughout the day. So advantages of exercise there with the measurements specifically. How about stress? Sorry, I moved too fast there with my slide. I apologize about that. How about stress? Cortisol is a hormone released when we're stressed. It's sometimes called the stress hormone. And what it does is it triggers our body to store fat and energy. And unfortunately, Many of us live in a state of chronic stress. So if our body is continuously releasing cortisol, it's continuously telling our body to store fat, right? And cortisol and other stress hormones add insult to injury by making us crave more of that quick energy, like sugars, right? And then our bodies store those extra sugars again and again, like we just talked about, creating that vicious cycle. So stress is really, really important when we're talking weight management, that type of thing. We need to get a handle on that stress response to help stop that cycle. And then we have sleep. When we sleep, our bodies secrete hormones to help us control our weight. When we don't get enough sleep, those hormones get messed up, right? We release more cortisol. You're going to hear that word a lot today. Your metabolism function also goes down with lack of sleep, which means that we don't use up the energy from the foods we do take in. If your body doesn't metabolize the foods we take in, we simply store it, again, leading to that weight gain. Again, the question here is how it affects our BMI and our measurements. This is exactly what happens. And then lastly, lack of sleep, it lowers our motivation and our energy, right? And our judgment is worse, our decision-making gets worse. So lots of indirect ways that lack of sleep affects things like weight and our measurements. All right, let's move on to blood pressure. Many people think the connection with nutrition and blood pressure is simply sodium or salt in your diet, right? You hear that a lot. Oh, cut down on that salt. This is why you're told that. Your kidneys help control your blood pressure by controlling the amount of fluid in your body. The more fluid, the higher the blood pressure. The kidneys need a balance of sodium and potassium in order to be able to pull water from the bloodstream so you can get rid of it, right? When we eat too much sodium, it can hurt that balance. Now, again, potassium is the other side of that discussion. So we can also make sure that we're getting enough food sources of potassium as well to help that balance. Magnesium and calcium are also important nutrients when it comes to blood pressure. Another big thing that's going to affect blood pressure comes back to that same place as our weight, avoiding overeating in general, right? If our weight is higher, our heart has to beat harder to get that blood moving, to get it to all of those areas, which can increase the pressure, leading to more strain and possible issues, right? Exercise is going to play a big part in blood pressure as well. Your heart is a muscle like any other in your body, and exercise is going to help strengthen it, right? Which helps that blood pressure. The stronger your heart, the more efficient it pumps. So the more consistent exercise that you get, getting that heart rate elevated specifically, the better that blood pressure tends to be. Again, we're just stronger overall with that heart. It's able to pump more at each beat, and it becomes more efficient. Blood pressure goes down. How about stress and blood pressure? This one's probably more known than a lot of other ones. A lot of times we can feel it happening, right? When we're stressed, we can feel that heart rate increase. We can get that uncomfortable sensation. Our body releases things like adrenaline and cortisol, which affect the blood pressure by making the heart beat faster. And it also constricts our blood vessels because it wants to keep that blood in the core of our body. It's that fight or flight. Our body doesn't know what kind of stress we're under, so it just does what it knows to do biologically. Now, this is a temporary response typically, right, with stress. And for most of us, once the stressor is gone, our blood pressure returns to normal. But again, like I mentioned once already, some of us are in an almost constant state of stress, different stress than hundreds of years ago, but stress nonetheless. That blood pressure can start to stay elevated, even when you don't feel stress. And that's where we get the issues, right? And that's how stress is affecting our blood pressure. How about sleep? Well, sleep helps your body regulate those hormones that we've already talked about a few times, and those hormones help regulate blood pressure as well. A study in the last few years, specifically in women, showed that sleep disturbances, not necessarily a lack of the amount of sleep, but when you get woken up and the quality of your sleep goes down, can increase risk of high blood pressure. And then again, you've got that indirect relationship. If you don't sleep well, typically We're tired, we're not handling stressors as well, right? You're not eating as well. Again, that vicious cycle tends to come. Those poor decisions due to lack of sleep or lack of quality of sleep can still affect that blood pressure in an indirect way. How about glucose? Glucose, which is the sugar in our blood, right? So it makes sense that the biggest way nutrition affects glucose is going to be sugar intake. Added sugars is typically what we want to focus on. So sugars that aren't naturally found in the food. Liquid sugars, things like sodas, sweetened teas are a big one. And then the usual suspects, candy, desserts, those types of things, right? We also need to pay attention to what we call refined carbohydrates. So carbs that have been stripped of the majority of the benefits that whole grains have. What happens is when you strip the fiber and a lot of those things away, they break down into the same thing, basically, as sugars in our body. So your white breads, your white pastas, rice, cereals, things like that are going to affect your body very similar to just regular sugar. Your fasting glucose, which is what we test for typically, is very much affected by your nutrition leading up to the screening. So something to really keep in mind when you're getting close to screening time, but overall in general, of course, as well. Exercise affects our glucose by helping to increase our insulin sensitivity, meaning that our body uses it better and reduces that risk of diabetes. Exercise uses up excess sugar, uses up excess carbohydrates in our bodies, which lowers the amount that stays in our blood, right? Makes sense. If we're testing the amount of blood sugar that we have, if we're helping to use it up by using that energy with a run or whatever exercise you've got, it's going to lower that amount. Your body's not going to have so much excess, and you're not going to have the risk of things like diabetes. How about stress and glucose? When that cortisol is released, it causes us to crave those sugary foods, right? Like I said, right? Leading to a short-term increase in that glucose. But again, if we're not turning that off, that cycle keeps going. And then when we store that extra fat, which I talked about, we typically store those things in our abdomen, which puts us at a higher risk for type 2 diabetes. That's why we do that waist measurement, is because it is correlated with heart issues and it is correlated with things like diabetes. And then sleep, again, similar to what we've already talked about, right? We have poor decision-making when we're tired. A study on the National Sleep Foundation's website looked at people that weren't entering that deepest sleep at night and found that their insulin sensitivity and glucose tolerance went down by 25%, so a fourth down. So again, that was just people that they were sleeping, but they weren't getting into that deep sleep. So it goes back to that quality. So again, it's not only about the amount of sleep, it's about the quality. But first step, getting yourself to bed at a good time to give yourself a chance at getting the most of that quality sleep as you can as a first step again, right? All right, how about cholesterol? We need cholesterol in our bodies. It is helpful, but if we have too much, specifically of the LDL and the triglycerides, it can put us at risk for heart disease. So nutrition is going to play a big part here. HDL, that good stuff, like I mentioned, is affected mainly by things like fiber and healthy fats in our diet. LDL, that bad stuff, is also affected by lack of fiber. So if you're not eating enough, it can raise that number. Also, we go back to our processed foods, right? Specifically foods that are heavy in processed carbohydrates or that are prepared in heavily processed oils, things like that. You know, just those prepackaged meals a lot are what we point to when we're talking about processed oils that can affect, and different, not just oils, but a lot of times that's what it is, but can affect that LDL. The amount of food we consume plays a bigger role in those triglycerides. And once again, over consuming those not so good carbohydrates, like those refined white breads, things like that, will have a negative effect on our triglycerides as well. Exercise can help cholesterol by helping to increase that HDL, and it also helps lower those triglycerides by, again, helping to burn off some of those excess calories and sugars and things that are affected by that triglycerides are affected by. How about stress? I found a study from 2017 that found that psychological stress is correlated with higher levels of triglycerides and LDL, and then a lower HDL. So the study believed that a couple things could be at play here. One is called hemoconcentration. So this causes the blood to lose fluid, which can be caused by stress. So the components of our blood become more concentrated, which can cause a higher cholesterol reading. And again, if you're stressed on that consistent basis, those numbers can start to stay elevated. And then here we go again, cortisol plays a part. This makes sense again though, because cortisol increases those cravings for unhealthy foods, right? Which affect our cholesterol. And there's also some talk that because stress can actually harm our immune system, it can lead to inflammation in our bodies, which also is correlated with cholesterol levels. And then again, of course, we know our other lifestyle habits when we're stressed aren't usually the best. So that roundabout way, that indirect way, we know that that can still affect those numbers. And then sleep. We've already covered the indirect ways with bad habits when we don't get enough sleep. You understand, right? But other studies have also linked irregular sleep patterns with cholesterol issues. So I'll just leave it at that. So basically, now we know, basically everything can affect all of our numbers, right? Which is an important thing to note, that no matter where you want to work on something, whether it be nutrition, exercise, stress, or sleep, you're going to have a positive effect on almost every one of these numbers. Okay, so that's the fantastic part, is one small step in one area is going to be helpful in multiple areas of your biometrics. So where do we start? Let's talk nutrition, because this is typically the biggest area, right? So I'm going to start with my normal go-to is tracking. Tracking does work. If you don't know what you're eating and what's in that food, you don't really know where you can improve, right? So you don't have to track everything forever. Just get a picture of your habits so you can set some goals to get started. So a couple days on a normal weekday and then a couple weekend days, see where you're at with what types of foods you're eating, set some small goals. So let's talk about each biometric, what you can do with that nutrition. So for those measurements, weight, waist, those types of things, we talked about overall calorie intake, right? So that's an easy one to start with. It's more complicated than that, but it's an easy one to start with. So you need to figure out how many calories you're eating, and then you need to figure out how many calories you burn per day. Now, there are different apps, different websites that you can find an estimate of your general calorie burn based on things like your height, your weight, your age, your sex, activity level, those types of things. And then you can input how big of a calorie deficit that you want, and it'll calculate how many calories you typically should eat. Now, again, this is an estimate. Everyone is going to be a little bit different, but again, starting point you can find on some of those sites. Now, the typical and safe recommendation for weight loss is to have a calorie deficit of about 500 calories per day. So that equals about 3,500 calories per week, which in theory is 1 pound weight loss. Again, it's going to be different, but that's in general where we're at with that. Now, it's not advisable. Really be careful with the amount of calories. Under 1,200 or 1,500 calories each day is not advisable. And if you're exercising, you should not be close to that number typically. Now, again, it's more complicated than this, and I can't tell you exactly what you need. It's kind of a trial and error to see what progress you're getting, how you're feeling. But again, this can be a good starting point and then a goal to get you moving in the right direction. And then once you find those number of calories, then you focus on the quality of calories, right? Don't forget about that. But this is a good step if you haven't done anything at this point. All right, how about blood pressure? I mentioned getting in general weight loss is effective for blood pressure, so that overall calorie intake can be important. We also talked about salt and potassium as two big factors, so recommendations are listed here. Now, again, this depends on different factors of how much you may need, so chat with your doctor, especially if you have any health concerns. Do your research, make sure it's right for you. Most people think of bananas when we think of good potassium things to eat, but there are plenty of other foods that pack in that potassium as well. Calcium and magnesium, I also mentioned to help look out for that blood pressure. So a few options and the recommended values here. Again, plenty of other ones, just a couple options I threw up here. So do your research, find what works in your diet. And then glucose, so sugar, right? Max of 25 grams of added sugar for women, 36 for men is the ultimate goal. That's the recommendation. So again, sugars that are not naturally occurring in the foods. So fruit is one of those where you don't necessarily have to put that into this number. Start with that added sugar and go from there. And again, just be mindful of the quality of your carbohydrates. Whole grain options, oats, 100% whole grain, quinoa, those types of things are good carbohydrate options that are going to have more of that fiber, more of that good stuff that's not going to break down in your body. And then for cholesterol, for HDL, I mentioned healthy fats and fiber. Got some healthy fat options here. Fiber-filled foods are going to include almost all of your fruits and veggies. Your goal should be around 25 grams per day for women, 38 for men. Again, general recommendation for the typical adult. And then LDL, again, fiber intake we're looking for. Also sugar intake, processed foods, again, always something to be mindful of. Stick with whole food options when you can. And then triglycerides or trigs, which are tied to that sugar, those refined carbohydrate intake. We need carbohydrates in our diet, but a lot of times we get too many again. So focus on that higher quality, those fruits and veggies. If you're eating healthy, you're going to get plenty of carbs from those fruits and veggies and whole grains, right? And then just look for whole food options when you can, really for every biometric benefit. All right, exercise. Where do I start with exercise? Now, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, not because it's not important, but because there's so many ways to get active, so many ways to exercise. It is truly about finding what works for you and what you enjoy. The recommendation for cardiovascular exercise or getting that heart rate up is 150 minutes per week of moderate or 75 minutes or more of vigorous activity or some combo of both. Then you want to sneak in some strength training, stretching, balance regularly as well. And those can be combined, right? You can do all of those things in one workout. Now, if you're not close to that amount, don't try to go crazy and do everything all at once, right? Start with those small goals and go from there. Look at your schedule, see what works, schedule time for you and for that exercise. Do what you can not to break those appointments, but just be flexible. Have a few different options for yourself. And then packing, if you're going to the gym, pack your bag, set out your exercise clothes, buy your treadmill or buy your computer if you're going to do an online workout, something like that to prompt you to work out. Those are good ways just to set yourself up for success when it comes to exercise specifically. Again, lots of different things that you can do with exercise. The goal, just do something. Right? Get that heart rate up. All right, where do I start with stress? What can you do to help calm that physical stress response? So if you've watched other webinars, very similar to what you've heard before, breathing, simple deep breathing. There are a few different breathing techniques and you can just deep breathe if you want to, but there's a couple that can help give it a little more structure. Box breathing or 4 square breathing, it's called. So really simple. You just inhale for a count of 4, hold that breath for a count of 4, exhale for the same, and then hold that exhale. So you can do this once, you can do it twice, you can do it for a couple minutes, depending on how much time you've got. What this does is this forces your body and your mind to slow down. It focuses your mind on counting and on that breathing rather than that stressor. So it slows down the breathing, which slows down the heart rate, which slows down that stress response, right? Another way that I don't think people utilize as much for that immediate stress is to focus on your senses. There's actually techniques out there for those with diagnosed anxiety that use senses as kind of a grounding method. Again, coming into the moment. It's just a way to bring you into the present. So really, really easy. You simply think of 5 things you see around you, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you hear, 2 things you might smell, and then something that you might taste. So all that does, again, it's focusing your mind on a simple task It slows things down for you. It just helps bring you into that moment, right? And then so things like positive self-talk or reframing is another effective technique. So let's say if you're in a traffic jam, for example, you can focus on the negatives, right? Oh, this is not fun, but it's not going to change your situation, right? So start to think of the positives in that situation. Hey, you're in traffic because you're heading to a concert, or you're in traffic because you have a job, right? You get more time to listen to your favorite songs or that podcast or audiobook that you just downloaded. Also, have some perspective. Is traffic backed up because someone's hurt in an accident? Be grateful that's not you or a loved one, right? Again, it's hard to get into this, but once you start to focus on the positives, it's a lot easier to find them. So practice makes perfect with this. So just keep focusing on those positives, keep reframing the situations when you're able to, and I promise it'll get easier. And then things like journaling. It's a great option for stress. You can do this a couple ways. You can jot down your negative thoughts, kind of downloading them from your brain, just get them out. Or you can do more of a positive gratitude journaling. Or you can do both. So you can start with the oh, let's get out my grievances for the day, but then you start with what went positive, you end with what went positive. So obviously recommend ending with the positives. So gratitude journaling specifically, again, it's effective to get you into a more positive mindset overall. So when we look for the positives, we're going to find more positives. So what I want you to do for stress is take some time to create a stress toolbox for yourself. So all I mean by this is to stop and think about your favorite activities or calming things and how you're going to incorporate them into your daily life. Exercise, eating well, meditations, music, that gratitude journal. Have your go-to list of people or pets to talk to. And then do these things even when you're not stressed or you don't feel stressed. If you get into the habit of doing things that make you happy and calm, then your body's going to better be able to deal with stress that does come up, because we can't avoid stress all the time, right? But we can change our response to it. And that's the key. That's where you're going to make yourself happier, stop that stress response, and stop some of those negative things that could happen with our biometrics. All right, sleep. Again, covering this stuff quick. We can go so much more in depth, but here are some things to think about. First, if possible, stick to a schedule. If you go to bed and get up at the same time, your body's able to create that wake-sleep schedule, then your hormones and your body's processes are typically better able to be regulated, right? Now, I know this isn't possible with some of you. If you can't go to bed at the same time, then create a similar routine that you can do before bed to help calm your body and your mind. So things like taking a bath, reading, meditation, anything that you can do to start that winding down process is going to be helpful in getting you to sleep whenever you are able to get to sleep. And then, of course, our healthy eating and exercise habits, like we just talked about, are really important to help with sleep. It sets your body up to be able to get into that sleep quality. And then environment, of course, temperature is important. 60 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit is what they recommend. Excess noise, if possible, get rid of that. If it is an issue, white noise machines, fans can help dampen those big noises that can wake you up, especially if you sleep during the day when traffic and people are out more. Pitch black is the best way to sleep, but as little light as possible. Blackout curtains, eye masks can help, especially again, if you're sleeping during the day where there's just more natural light. Also, try and stop using technology as far ahead of bedtime as possible, as these lights can mess with our body's production of melatonin, which is a hormone that helps us sleep. And then just check out your mattress and pillows. Might be time for an upgrade. I know it can be expensive, but good quality are well worth it when you consider how much sleep affects our overall health, right? Okay, let's wrap it up. There are a lot of things that you can do to help you get healthier, feel better, improve that overall biometric score. But again, the feeling better, the getting healthier is what's most important here. All you need to do is take that first step, right? When you're deciding what to change, ask yourself, what do you want to change? Now, may not be anything, right? I get it. Change is hard, but pick one thing that you are most motivated to do. And then ask yourself, what's realistic for me to do to get to that goal, right? The smaller the change, the better, because it's going to be more realistic to keep up. Then move on to that next one once you feel comfortable. Small changes are the best way to go. Start now. Next time you take your screening, you're gonna be in a good spot. And then track your progress and celebrate, right? Before you know it, you're gonna feel better, you're gonna be happier, and those numbers are gonna show it too. All right, upcoming webinars next month, right in the middle of summer here, we're going to talk about skin health. Lots of different ways that your skin can say a lot about your health. So we'll talk about that. And then in August, we're going to talk about essential nutrients for your health. A lot of different ways that we can get in nutrients that help us feel good, help us get healthier. And then if you do have lifestyle rewards, and if you have questions attached to those, these will pop up for you. You can download the slides if you do need these questions. I'm not going to stick on this for too long here. And then, of course, here's our contact information as normal. We are on social media. You can watch this webinar and other past webinars and register for upcoming webinars on our blog. Give us a call, shoot us an email with questions that you've got. And yeah, keep in touch with everything. So I'm going to open it up for questions here.